Okay, well, hello, YouTubers. Um, my name is Earl Saniba, and I'm gonna give you guys 10 tips to becoming a better portrait artist overall in general. And while I give you guys those tips, hopefully you can learn even more by watching the video and watching me draw this portrait of Morgan Freeman. Okay, here we go. Tip number one, guys. Tip number one, if you want to become a better portrait artist, you have to do preliminary sketches. You need to do preliminary sketches because they really help you warm up before you do your main drawing. And preliminary sketches help you figure out the composition you want to use, the lighting you want to use. You can solve your biggest problems before you even start your piece, because sometimes you don't want to start your piece and then realize that you wanted to use a different lighting, and then you have to start over. That really sucks. You can avoid those problems by doing preliminary sketches and figuring out what you want before you commit to the final piece. And also with doing preliminary sketches, you can learn a few things. You can make a few mistakes you can make a few mistakes in the sketching phase that you can avoid in the final phase. So basically, you use that as a learning process. Okay, guys, and that's tip number one. And now tip number two would be you should always, if you can, you always want to have an underpainting or underdrawing when you start. You want to start light. If you're using graphite, you want to start with a highly erasable pencil, something you can use, something you can erase very easily, because you're going to make mistakes. The proportions might be off when you get it the first time, and you might need to erase a few times. And that underdrawing is not really going to show much in the final piece. That's basically the foundation that you need to lay down. And when you do this underdrawing, you know, it really just gives you that foundation. And with this painting that I'm working on right now, you can see I'm actually starting in black and white. And this is going to lead you to my tip number three. Tip number two and three are kind of related. You want to do, if you can, you want to always do a value study. Okay? Do a value study for whatever portrait you're going to work on. So if you're going to work on Nelson Mandela or Obama, whoever it is you want to draw, if you're going to use, if the final painting is going to be in full color, a lot of times it's best for you to do a value study first. So once again, you can figure out the lighting, you can figure out the composition, you can figure out what kind of technique you want, and a lot of other problems you could solve in the value study before you commit to the final piece. And value is so important in illustration. you know Without a good value study, your piece is going to fall. If your piece doesn't have good values, strong contrast between the lights and the darks, you know if it doesn't have that positive negative relationship between the lights and the darks, it's not going to be a successful piece. And no matter how much color you add to the piece, it's not going to be successful. And then tip number five: when you draw your portraits, guys, you want to start from the big shapes to the smaller shapes. So you want to start with the overall shape of the head, the shape of his body. You want to get that down. You want to get a basic idea, a basic foundation down before you move to the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. It's a lot easier when you work that way, from big to small. You don't want to work from small to big. A lot of beginners, when they want to start drawing, even professionals do this sometimes. And I'm not saying it's wrong, but for a lot of people, it's just not the feasible way to work. You want to start with the bigger shapes, and a lot of people actually start with the smaller shapes. They start with something like, for example, the eye. They start drawing the eye, then they realize, oh wait, his head is going to be too big. It's not going to fit the page. With Photoshop, if you're using Photoshop, you can get away with that problem. But if you're using actual traditional media, you might have to be more careful. You can't just start with the eye and expect the whole head to fit in there. There might not be enough space. So this is why the previous tips I've given you, this is where they come in. The preliminary sketching phase, doing an underdrawing, a value study, you know. And then tip number 5. Actually, I can't remember what number I'm on, but next tip. Let's just move on to the next tip. You want to choose the right reference photos. If you're drawing from life, you want to choose the right angle to draw from. You don't. A lot of times, it's really. A lot of times, if you're drawing from life, you don't want to draw the person dead on. You want to draw the person more from an angle, so you can get a more dynamic composition and you can get a more dynamic view. You can draw the person from a profile as well. And generally, you wouldn't really want to draw his back because that's not really the most interesting part of a face unless you are doing a piece for very specific reasons or for a specific target audience. Then you might need to draw the back. Either way, depending on the situation, you want to have the right reference photos. You want to have the best reference photos you can get, the highest quality you can get. You want to have the highest quality you can get. The bigger the photo, the better. The higher the resolution, the better. Because you want to focus on those details if you're using photos. If you're drawing from life, if you can get closer to the portrait, if you can get closer to the person modeling from life, the better. If you're drawing, for example, at the mall, we're actually going to get to that later. I'm not going to talk about that right now. Let's move on to the next tip. I'm just going to say this is tip number 6. Yes, tip number 6. It is a good idea to use your pencil to measure proportions. Guys, this is one of the biggest tips. If you want to get a good likeness, you have to get the proportions right. And getting proportions correctly comes with practice. I'm not perfect at it. I'm still working on it mainly because I'm not a professional portrait artist. I just do this for fun. I'm actually an illustrator and I really focus more on landscapes. So I don't really do portraits that often. But whenever I draw or paint a portrait, even in Photoshop, I use my pencil to measure the proportions. You can use a ruler, you can use whatever you want to use. So long as you have some kind of tool to help you measure the proportions, you want to see the the relationship between the length of the mouth to the length of the nose, or the spaces between the eyes. You want to see if the space between both eyes is actually one eye length. Sometimes people's eyes are further apart. Sometimes their eyes are closer together. It depends on the individual, and your pencil will help you figure out those proportions. A lot of people try to eyeball it, and that's fine. But if you actually use the pencil technique, it will make a huge difference, and you will improve a lot faster. Okay, now on to the next tip. Tip number 7. Okay, guys, you want to focus on the asymmetrical aspects of the person's face, because when you think about it, no one has a perfectly symmetrical face. I don't care who you are. If you go down to a microscopic level, nobody has a perfectly symmetrical face. When an artist has a really good grasp of the asymmetrical proportions, the asymmetrical qualities of the person's face, it shows that he has a good understanding of what the person's face looks like, and he can really use that to his advantage, especially if the person is doing a caricature. A lot of caricature artists, they usually tend to focus on the imperfections of the face, and not necessarily imperfections, but just the asymmetrical qualities of the face. And they look for the the more prominent facial features, and they exaggerate those just a bit. Some of them exaggerate those to an extreme level, and they pull it off. That's not really my field of expertise, but I really admire art like that. And now let's go to tip number 8. Okay, this is actually not even a tip. This is so easy, guys. And it's funny because a lot of people don't really it takes people years to realize this, you know? When you're drawing a portrait and you're drawing the eye and you're coloring or shading the eye, remember that the eye, the white part of the eye, is never really white. It's never actually white. Most people don't even have white eyes. Most people actually have creamy or tan eyes or yellowish eyes, red eyes, but never is somebody's eye pure white. The only part of the eye that is usually pure white would be the highlight, the tiniest highlight inside the iris. You know, sometimes it touches the pupil, sometimes it doesn't. It depends. But generally, the white of the eye is usually never white. So guys, keep that in mind when you draw, when you shade, and when you're if you're using pencil, the eye might be some kind of gray. Depending on the lighting situation, it might be a dark gray. Sometimes you won't even see the eye depending on the lighting situation. So there you go. The eye is never really white, guys. And number 9, a tip to get better. If you really want to get good fast, you have to do this. And tip number 9 is you need to draw from life. You know, draw from life. Nothing beats drawing from observation, guys. I'm telling you, the person who draws from observation is most likely the better artist because you learn so much from nature itself. Nature is your best teacher. There's no other teacher better. Yes, your art teacher is great and that's cool, but Mother Nature is the best because she holds the key, all the answers to every lighting situation, to basically every human proportion out there. You know, all the reference you need is out there in nature, in the world. If you want to draw trees, landscapes, people, cars, whatever it is you want to draw, even abstract art, people learn a lot in every field just by drawing from life. That's how good it is, guys. And when you draw from life, you put yourself in situations where you put yourself in a lot of situations where you might not be able to succeed. You might not be able to complete the drawing, especially when you sketch people who are moving. For example, people at a mall or Walmart, you know, it's kind of hard to draw people who are moving, and that's where gesture drawings come in. And with those, you can really get good fast. You can become faster at mapping out the general shape of the face, you know. So it makes it easier for you to move on to the coloring phase and the refining phase of the painting and stuff like that. So guys, drawing from observation, drawing from life, plein air painting, all that good stuff. It's real. That's the stuff that's really that's this I would say is my favorite tip, and this is one of the most important things you need to do if you want to become a very powerful illustrator, if you want to become good at drawing portraits. Because if you want to become good at drawing people, you need to draw people, and the best place to find people is here on Earth. You know, so it's really that simple, guys. And then the last tip, once again, something very obvious, but people tend to overlook this all the time. Okay? The last tip, tip number 10. Tip number 10, guys. Consistency and practice. You need to practice every day. Draw every day. I don't care who you are. I don't care how good you are. You need to draw every day. You know, if you're a beginner and you want to get better, draw every day. If you're intermediate and you want to become the next level professional, draw every day, every single day. Draw. Everywhere you are, you need to draw. Even in your dreams, draw, you know. And even if you're a professional, if you want to stay a professional, you better keep drawing. Because if you stop drawing, you will forget. You will lose your skills. Trust me. You know? What happens to a runner when he stops running for a few weeks? They lose their momentum. They really do. They lose their momentum when they stop running for a few weeks. The same thing with people who work out. All these athletes, when they stop working out for a few weeks, they lose their muscles. You know, they lose their strength, their their they lose their stamina. So they need to work out consistently, frequently. Make it a routine. Whenever you wake up in the morning, pick up your sketchbook, go outside and draw. During your lunch break at work, pick up your sketchbook, go outside and draw. You know, if you're a college kid and you have a lot of homework, just spend 30 minutes every single day drawing in your sketchbook. Just do that every day. Especially if you're drawing from life every day, you will get good really fast if you do that every day. Okay? And guys, there you have it. That's 10 tips to becoming a better illustrator slash artist. And now that we have a little bit of extra time, I'm just going to talk about this painting and just basically how we got this far in this painting. And these tips that I'm giving you were I actually came up with these tips as I was working on this piece, because when I started this piece, I did some preliminary sketches. I basically Googled Morgan Freeman's name and then saw a bunch of photos, and I did some quick sketches just by looking at different photos online. And then when I found this photo, I realized I wanted to draw this one. So I then proceeded to do a quick value study. It took me about, I would say, 3 4 minutes. It didn't really look like anything substantial, and that's why I didn't show it to you guys. But if you guys want me to show you that process, that part of my process, I can definitely upload a video showing you guys what I do before I actually start the piece. Because basically, I would say a painting is like cooking. You know, before you cook, you need to plan what you're gonna cook. You need to make plans, get your ingredients ready, your tools ready. You know, and then you need to warm up before you really just get into the main event. You got to cut the tomatoes before you put it in the pot. And the final piece in this case would be the pot. And then the thumbnails, the value studies, and the preliminary sketches, I would say, would be cutting up the tomatoes and the carrots and whatever it is you need to cook. That's my analogy, guys. Um, yeah, so basically, I did a value study, and then after that, I began to just draw with a light touch. Basically, I began to draw the just the basic shape of the head with the proportions. At that stage, I wasn't really too worried about the proportions because I'm working in Photoshop. I am able to really fix my mistakes very easily. But if I was using graphite or ink, I would definitely make sure that I have my proportions right before I move on to the next stage. So depending on whatever medium you work with, depending on the medium, you might have to stay longer in the underdrawing phase. And the longer you stay in that phase, the more successful your piece might become. Because it's okay to stay in that phase for 7 hours and then have a great piece. It's perfectly fine to do that. You are not, do not, there's no need to be in a hurry. You know, you're not going anywhere. Just take your time. Make sure you have the proportions right before you move on. Depending on what medium you use, you can change the proportions later in the game. And that's why I like Photoshop, because you can change it. You can really just correct your mistakes very easily, very quickly. Unlike graphite, if you once you go dark with the pencil, and if you've made a mistake by then, that's pretty much it. You might need to start over, and that sucks. You know. So basically, after doing the underdrawing with this painting, after doing the underdrawing, I basically moved along to adding color slowly and gradually. And with this piece, I made sure that most saturated part of the most saturated part of the painting would be his face. You know, because that's what I want the viewers to look at. Excuse me for a second. That's what I want the viewers to look at, you know. And as I begin to add more color, I try to keep. I'm always looking at the proportions, making sure I have the proportions correct. And as you can see throughout the painting, I am changing stuff, moving the mouth here and there, moving the eyes here and there to make sure that it's really accurate. You know, I'm doing the best I can. I'm not going to be perfect at it, and that's okay. I'm not a photocopy machine, and I'm okay with that. You know, but at least I'm going to do the best I can to get the proportions right while I move on to the next stages. So even in the coloring stage, I'm still working on the proportions, making sure everything checks out. And I don't know if you've seen this before in the painting in this video so far, but I usually flip my canvas around. If you're working traditionally, you want to look at your piece through a mirror. You know, if you're working traditionally, look at it through a mirror, and it's gonna give you a fresh eye, a whole new perspective. You're gonna see a lot more mistakes that you weren't able to see when you were looking at it normally without the mirror or without flipping it. And when you flip it, it really helps you see the errors you've made. You see the mistakes. You see many different ways to fix the proportions. You know, and that's the main thing for me, and it can help you figure out better ways to get a better composition as well. So flipping your canvas every now and then and checking on the proportions is a good thing you want to do. And you know, right now I guess I'm signing the piece. And right now I think this is the end of the video. So I'm going to show you guys the final version of what I made. You can find this at the link below. And if you learned at least one thing from this video, I'm going to have to ask you to like the video, comment, subscribe, and please share. Thank you.